Good afternoon. My name is Mackenzie Wheeler, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the biomechanical properties of the integumentary system of the human body and why it's important. So, what is the integumentary system and why is it important? The integumentary system is essentially just the skin, and interestingly, it's actually the largest organ in the human body. The skin is a vital part to the human body, and many people believe that its importance is simply to be a layer to cover the body's bones and muscles, but it's actually much more than that. The skin helps protect the inside of the body from external factors in the external environment. And as you can see here on the right, I've got a figure that has several different layers of the skin, such as the sweat glands, the fats, connective tissue, blood vessels. But today, I'm predominantly going to be focusing on the epidermis and the dermis at first, and then later on, I'm going to discuss a little more about the hypodermis and some studies that were conducted on all three of these layers. Like I mentioned previously, many people think that the skin is just a simple layer, but to really understand how it protects us, it's important to analyze and understand the biomechanical properties of the skin. So the epidermis and the dermis, those top two layers, can help protect against different biological invasions, such as maybe a bee or a wasp sting, different injuries. If you fall and scrape your knee, that skin heals. And it can also protect against harmful UV radiations if you're out in the sun a lot. And it can, the epidermis and the dermis can also help resist decrease in the skin integrity from any kind of movement, like if you're running or walking, jumping, any stretching, like before or after you exercise, or really just in everyday activities. And even if any force is applied, such as maybe stepping on a piece of glass, the skin, all of its biomechanical properties are extremely important to understanding how the skin protects us. So, what is the skin composed of, and how does it protect us from harmful invasion? Collagen makes up 77% of human skin, and 4% of the skin is elastin. So together, collagen and elastin make up 81% of the skin, which is clearly a really large portion. These two components alone are proteins that are critical to the skin's elasticity. Um, and as you can see here on the right, elastin and collagen, they bind together to create a very high elasticity for the skin. And you can also see here that as the skin begins to age, these elastins and collagen fibers begin to separate, causing a decrease in protection, which I'll be discussing a little bit later. But you can also see here on the right, there's maybe select some divots within that top epidermis layer, and those are wrinkles. So over time, as you get older, you start to age and start to wrinkle, and that's a visualization of the wrinkling and how it can affect the elastin and collagen fibers as well. Skin elasticity and skin viscoelasticity are the two primary mechanical properties that are analyzed when discussing the integumentary system. And elasticity is simply the ability of skin to return to its original form after it is stretched or deformed. And skin viscoelasticity is very similar to elasticity, but instead it incorporates a hydration and fluid factor. And so, interestingly, the skin actually holds 20% of the body's water intake. Um, and skin viscoelasticity measures the skin's ability to overcome the stress between different layers of molecules due to friction. And so this picture here has elasticity on the left, viscous behaviors on the right, and you can see here that elasticity has a very firm factor, and then viscous behavior has hydration and liquid factor. And so if you combine these two together, you get viscoelasticity in the center, which is what makes up a normal skin layer. And I also read in one of the articles that because of the viscoelasticity, there is a higher protection against injury because they're just able to move a little bit more due to that hydration factor. And so going back, a couple slides where I discussed how the epidermis and the dermis can help resist damaging like the skin integrity after any sort of movement or applied force or stretching, that is because of the viscoelasticity of the skin. Because of that fluid, it's able to return back to its original form. And I also thought this figure was interesting because I just searched, the elastic and viscoelastic behaviors in the skin, and at the bottom of this figure, it just happened to mention how you can quantitatively measure these two mechanical properties using atomic force microscopy, or AFM, which we talked about in class. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. To gain a better understanding of the mechanical properties of the skin, some researchers decided to conduct mechanical testing on the forearms of 10 different subjects. All 10 subjects were men and they were around the age of 30 years old, and each test was conducted 5 times. So there was a total of 50 tests, and the mechanical model that they had was equivalent to an assembly of 3 springs with different stiffness values of K1, K2, and Ks, and each of these springs were connected in series, with E1 and E2 being the Young's modulus for the dermis and the hypodermis, respectively, and ES being the Young's modulus of the muscle. E1 was the thickness of the dermis, and E2 was the thickness of the hypodermis, where A is the contact radius between the indenture and the material. So you may be wondering why they didn't include the epidermis in this series of springs, and that is because the thickness of the epidermis measured to be less than 80 micrometers, whereas the thickness of the hypodermis was about 0.8 millimeters, and the dermis was about 1.2 to 1.5 millimeters. So the researchers believe that the contribution of the epidermis to the mechanical responses of the skin was too small to be used, so that it was neglected. So you can see here on the right side of the screen, there is a graph of the Young's modulus as a function of penetration depth, and the researchers decided to indent a little further than previous literature values showed, because they thought that the further you penetrate, the more significant your results would be. And so you can see here that as you continue to penetrate, the elastic modulus actually increases, and I should note that the indentation depth was approximately 400 micrometers per second, and the subject 1 here in this graph is actually like a bold line, and that represents the average that was obtained for this study. One of the main functions of the skin is its ability to stretch. And when the skin stretches, bundles of elastin fibers begin to straighten and they begin to cross-link. And one of the most common and extreme examples of stretching skin occurs during pregnancy. And so during pregnancy, you can see here on the right, I've got a picture of this is a postpartum pregnancy with right after the baby has been born. These are stretch marks, and then after whenever they've healed, then that's the after picture of them. And so stretch marks arise when the skin's elastic fibers suddenly stretch, and they begin to break and eventually rupture. So they are essentially scars that occur in the dermal layer of the skin, and they have different color stretch marks as well, with like purple and blackish stretch marks. But those can heal because that means that there's still blood fluid within those stretch marks. But you also may have stretch marks that are more of a white and clear color, and those are unfortunately those are permanent because there's not any blood flow within them. And so the bottom left figure here is a screenshot that I took of my computer screen when I typed in how to heal stretch marks in Google. And I just found this picture interesting because each of these products focuses on hydrating stretch marks. Like that's really the key of healing stretch marks, is to make sure they stay hydrated. And all of these creams down here and all these solutions to healing stretch marks are full of collagen. As I mentioned earlier, age plays a very large role in the mechanical properties of skin, and when you analyze how age affects the skin, there are two predominant categories that you would analyze, and that is the extrinsic skin that would age due to UV radiation exposure over the years, while intrinsic skin aging occurs from tissue degeneration, such as a loss of collagen fibers and elasticity, or with less hydration. And the extrinsic skin's collagen consumption is approximately 56% less than that of the aged intrinsic skin, which I thought was pretty interesting. And so these results shown on this slide were from a study that was conducted similarly to the study I mentioned earlier with the conical indenture head. And these subjects were also tested on their forearms, and these graphs mentioned the thickness, and so the thickness here was also just a sum of the dermis and the hypodermis layer. Similar to the last study, the epidermis was not incorporated just because it was the thickness was so small, it was neglected. So here on the far right, we've got a graph of the thickness as a function of age, and you can see here that men's skin is much thicker than women's, ranging from about 0.65 to 0.90 millimeters. And I saw in one article that skin thickness actually progresses approximately 6% per decade, which I thought was pretty interesting. This next graph here in the middle is a plot of the elasticity as a function of age, and although there's not a super drastic change in the elasticity of men and women, you can see that there is a very similar trend with men's elasticity ranging from about 0.7 to 0.97 megapascals and women to about 0.6 to 0.92 megapascals. And really the most important aspect of this entire figure is just to note the drastic decreasing trend in elasticity as both men and women age. And this is essentially due to a loss of collagen fibers and less hydration. So as we continue to the right, we have a figure of the viscoelasticity as a function of age. And you can tell that there is a very significant difference in the viscoelasticity of men and women's skin. And the largest point to target here is the fact that although there is a drastic difference in viscoelasticity of men and women's skin, it does not necessarily increase or decrease a significant amount as people age, whereas there is a significant decrease in elasticity as people age. The stress-strain curve shown here on the left is from a study that tested the resistance of skin. In separate studies, researchers found that the maximum stress of skin can range from 4.6 to 20 MPa, and although that's a large range, it's depending that those numbers are depending on the location of the body. So different parts of the body will have different maximum stresses applied. Another set of researchers found that strain, particularly around the kneecap, was approximately 0.446. This last figure here on the right is simply a picture of tension lines in the skin, and I just thought that this was really interesting because it emphasizes how even in a relaxed state, our bodies are always undergoing mechanical loads. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Thank you for listening to my talk today. I hope that learning a little bit more about the integumentary system was as interesting for you as it was for me. And are there any questions?